Hey, my name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 33 years old and I live in two small rooms over a country store at the crossroads of Route 21 and an old county road just outside Sparta up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It isn't much by anybody's measure. Two gas pumps under a tin awning that hums when the wind comes down off the ridge. A screen door with a spring that's been slapping shut for 40 years. 3 narrow aisles of canned goods and motor oil and penny candy. A coffee pot that's always on and a wooden porch across the front with 2 rocking chairs nobody sits in anymore. Mercer's Corner, the faded sign says. My grandfather nailed the first board of it up in 1961, and my father stood behind that counter for 31 years after him. And now it's me. It's the only thing my family ever built. And it's about due to payments from belonging to a man who wants to bulldoze it into a parking lot. There's a light on the porch that I never turn off. A plain yellow bulb in a tin fixture over the door, burning all night, in every kind of weather. My father kept it lit the whole time he ran the place, and his father before him. And when I was a boy and asked him why he wasted the power, he told me something I've never been able to shake loose. He said, "Caleb, that road out there runs dark for 11 miles in both directions. And there's always somebody driving it at 2 a.m. who is lost or broke down or just plain worn out of hope. A lit door doesn't cost you but a few cents a night. And you never know which night it's the only light some poor soul can find. So I keep it burning. Long after I've locked the register and climbed the stairs, that porch light stays on over an empty road, and I've never once thought to turn it off. Because turning it off would be like telling my father to his face that I'd stopped believing what he believed. People up here used to know me as Del Mercer's boy, and that was enough of a name to carry. But my father died 2 years ago, this past spring, dropped in the stockroom with a case of oil in his arms, and was gone before the ambulance made the grade. And I've been the whole store by myself ever since. I'm not much of a talker. I never went off to college. I stayed and I ran the pumps. And I learned the ledger, and I told myself there'd be time for the rest of a life later. There wasn't. My mother's been gone longer than my father. I've got no wife, no children, nobody upstairs but me and a dog named Scout, who's mostly deaf now. Folks come in for their gas and their milk and their lottery tickets, and they're kind enough. But at the end of the day, the store empties out and the mountain goes quiet, and it's just me and that light burning over a road nobody's on. And here's the trouble that was already closing in on me that autumn, because I want you to understand the whole of what I was carrying before the rest of it walked through my door. A man named Garrett Rourke had wanted my corner for the better part of 2 years. Rourke Land Partners, the sign on his truck said, out of Charlotte. He builds those big travel plazas out where 2 highways cross, the kind with 16 fuel islands, and a fast food row, and a parking lot you could land a plane on. And my little crossroads was exactly the piece of dirt he wanted for the next one. Twice he'd offered to buy me out. The second time it was $90,000, and he slid the paper across my own counter and gave me a smile that only used the bottom half of his face, and I told him no. I told him my grandfather laid the foundation of that building with his own 2 hands, and my father died on its floor, and there is no number a man can write on a check that buys back the ground your whole family is standing on. Rourke folded his offer up slow and put it in his coat, and he said, "One of these slow winters is going to close you, Caleb, and then I won't have to buy you out at all. I'll just wait." He was closer to right than I liked. The store had been losing money for a year, And that September, a letter came from the bank saying my father's old operating loan, $31,000 of it, had been sold to a new note holder. And the new note holder was calling the whole balance due in 90 days. 90 days. Or they'd foreclose on the building and the land under it. I made 3 calls before I understood. The company that had bought my little loan out from under me was a shell with a Charlotte address, and behind the Charlotte address, if you pulled enough threads, was Garrett Rourke. He hadn't been able to buy my corner, so he'd bought my debt, and now he was going to take it the slow, legal, patient way instead. The hearing to confirm the foreclosure was set for the week before Christmas. I had a store that made maybe $40 of profit on a good day and a mountain of $31,000 due. And I sat at my father's counter that night, doing sums that only ever came out one way. And I turned off every light in the place but the one over the door, and I went up the stairs feeling like the last Mercer who would ever climb them. That was a Thursday in the middle of October, and it was raining the kind of cold, sideways mountain rain that gets into the bones, when I heard a car cough and die out in my lot a little after 11 at night. I'd already locked up. I stood at the top of the stairs in my socks and listened, and I heard a starter grind and catch nothing, grind and catch nothing, and then go silent. And then, after a while, I heard a car door open and close, soft, like whoever it was didn't want to be a bother even to the dark. I could have let it be. I was tired down to the floor of myself, and I had my own troubles stacked to the ceiling. But my father's light was burning over that door for a reason, and a man can't keep a light on for strangers and then hide from the stranger it brings. So I came down and I opened up. There was a young woman standing at the bottom of the porch steps in the rain, not coming up them. She had an old blue sedan dead at my pumps, with the hood already up, and she was soaked clean through, holding a thin jacket closed at her throat with one hand, and she had the particular stillness of somebody who has already been turned away from a lot of doors and is bracing to be turned away from one more. She was maybe 27, with dark hair plastered to her face, and she looked at me the way you look at a checkpoint. "I'm sorry," she said. "I saw your light. I know you're closed. My car it quit and my phone's dead, and I didn't know there was anything else out here. I'll get out of your way. I just needed to know if there was somewhere a person could stand out of the rain for a minute." "Come up on the porch at least," I said. "You're going to catch your death standing in that." She came up under the awning, but no farther, and she stood dripping and shivering and trying to hold herself like she wasn't. I asked her what her car was doing. She said it had been running hot for 2 days, and then it just lost all its power on the grade and rolled into my lot on the last of it. I told her I could look at it in the morning. I wasn't a real mechanic, but I could look. And she said, "That's kind of you, but I don't think I can pay for it." She said it flat, the way you say a thing you've already made yourself get used to saying. "I don't have it. I've got about $11 and a car that won't run, and I'm not going to sit here and let you fix it thinking you're going to get paid, because you're not. And I've had about enough of owing people this week." I stood there second in my own doorway, with the rain coming off the tin. And I'll tell you what went through me, because it's the hinge of everything that came after. It wasn't pity. Pity is a thing you hand down to somebody you've already set below you. What went through me was my father's voice, and a dark road 11 miles in both directions, and a light I keep burning for exactly this, and had somehow never once expected to actually answer. I said, I didn't ask you for $11. I asked you to get out of the rain. There's hot coffee inside and a chair by the heater, and you're going to sit in it, and we'll worry about the car and the money and all the rest of it when it's light and you're warm. And she looked at me for a long moment like she was checking the sentence for the catch that's always in it. There wasn't one. So she came inside. Her name was Nora Vance. I got the wood stove in the back roaring and gave her my father's old flannel coat off the hook and a towel and a mug of coffee. She wrapped both hands around like it was the first warm thing she'd touched in a week. And I didn't ask her a single question, because a person warming up at your stove is a guest, not a witness. But she told me some of it anyway, in pieces, staring into the stove. She'd been an office manager and a bookkeeper at a title company down in Charlotte for 6 years. Good job. The kind of job you build a whole quiet life on top of. And 2 months ago they'd fired her, walked her out with a box, and made sure the story that followed her out the door was that she was a thief. She wasn't a thief. She said it once, quiet, not asking me to believe it, just setting it down. I'm not a thief, Mr. Mercer. I got fired for the opposite of that. And then she stopped, like she'd already said more than she meant to. And she looked embarrassed, and she said, I'm sorry. You don't need my whole life. I just needed to be warm. Thank you. I made up the little cot in the stock room that my father used to nap on, and I told her the door had a bolt on the inside, and she could throw it if she wanted, and I could see the small relief go through her that I'd thought to say so before she had to ask. And I went up my stairs and lay awake a long while, listening to the rain and to the almost forgotten sound of another person breathing under my roof. And I thought, that's a woman running from something with $11 and a dead car, and tomorrow I'll fix what I can fix and send her on down the road. And that'll be the end of it. I have never in my life been more wrong about how a thing was going to go. Her car needed a water pump and a radiator hose, and better part of a day, and I didn't have the pump. So I ordered one up from the parts man in town, and it wasn't coming till Monday. So Nora Vance was at my crossroads through the weekend, and she was not a woman who could sit still and be waited on. By Saturday noon, she'd found my ledger. I'd left it open on the counter. The big canvas-backed book my father kept the store's accounts in, because I'd been staring at it and losing to it every night for a month. She wasn't snooping. She'd offered to help me stock a shipment, and I'd waved at the counter and gone to the back, and when I came out, she was standing over the book with a pencil behind her ear, and an expression I hadn't seen on anybody's face in that store since my father died, which was the expression of a person who is good at a hard thing and has just found the hard thing in front of her. She looked up, half guilty. I'm sorry, she said. I do this. It's a sickness. But Mr. Mercer, you're paying almost 40% more than you should for half these dry goods because you're ordering them one case at a time from 3 different suppliers, and your fuel margin's set wrong at the pump. It's been wrong for a while. You're actually losing a few cents on every gallon you sell. Do you mind if I look at it properly? Nobody had offered to look at anything properly in 2 years. I said, be my guest. And I meant it more than she knew. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt watching her. Because it wasn't only gratitude. It was the plain, warm shock of not being alone with a thing that was too big for one person. She spent the whole rest of that day at my counter with the ledger and a legal pad, and she was still there at dusk. And when I finally told her She had to eat something. She looked up like she was surprised to find it had gotten dark. That night I fried up what I had and we ate at the little table in the back by the stove. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet in that store didn't feel like a thing pressing down on me. It felt like a thing we were sitting inside of together. She stayed. I'd like to tell you there was some grand reason, but the truth of it is smaller and better than that. Monday came, and the water pump came, and I fixed her car, and it ran, and she came and stood in the bay while I wiped my hands, and she said I could get it running for you, the store. Not fixed. I don't want to promise you fixed, but I could get the bleeding stopped and the book straight, and you'd know exactly where you stand, which is more than you know right now. I don't have anywhere I have to be. That was the truth in her voice, the not having anywhere to be, and it cost her something to say it plain. And I said, I can't pay you either. Fair's fair. And she laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard out of her, and she said, then we're even, and I've got room and board and a car that runs, which is about $11 more than I had Thursday. Deal? So the weeks turned over, and Nora Vance dug my store out of a hole, one afternoon at a time. She put all my ordering with one supplier and got the volume price. She fixed the fuel margin. She built me a spreadsheet that showed, in black and white, that Mercer's Corner could actually make a living if it stopped bleeding out the seams. And she showed me the number I'd need to clear the note, and it was a real number, a hard number, but for the first time it was a number and not just a wall. And in and around all of it, the store filled up with small human things again. She put a jar of Ridgeline asters on the counter. She taught herself the coffee regulars' names faster than I ever had. She found my mother's old cast iron skillet in the back and seasoned it and started keeping a pot of something warm on the stove. And word got around the ridge that Mercer's Corner had soup now. And people started coming in who hadn't come in for years. She took my father's dusty rockers off the porch and cleaned them and set them back out. And on the mild evenings we'd sit in them after close. Not always talking, watching the dark come down over the road with the porch light, burning yellow over our heads. It was on the porch, one of those evenings, that she told me the rest of it. She said the title company she'd worked for did a lot of business for developers, closing land deals, filing deeds and easements, and one day her boss put a stack of documents in front of her to notarize and file, and the signatures were wrong. She knew the real signatures. She'd filed the real ones for years. These were forgeries, and the notary stamp on them wasn't a real notary. It was a stamp they kept in a drawer, and the deals moved land from little owners who didn't know any better to a developer who did. She said, I told my boss I wouldn't file them, and I told him I'd have to report it. And 3 days later, I was walked out of the building with security carrying my box, and there was a story going around that I'd been stealing from client accounts, and it was a good enough story that nobody would hire me after, and I had a lawyer for about a week until I ran out of money to pay him. And then I had a car, and then the car had a radiator hose, and then I had your porch light. She wasn't crying. She said it looking straight out at the road, level, the way you tell a thing you've made yourself hard enough to hold. And she said, so when you told me you didn't ask me for $11, Mr. Mercer, that was the first door in 2 months that opened without a price on it. I'll get your store right for you. That's the only way I know how to say thank you. I told her my name was Caleb, and it was past time she used it. She smiled at the road and said it once. Caleb, trying the weight of it. and something in the middle of my chest that had been shut a long time came unlatched. Quiet, the way a bolt slides back on a door you'd forgotten you'd barred. I hadn't told her about Rourke. I don't rightly know why. Maybe because those weeks were the only good thing I'd had in 2 years, and I didn't want to drag the ugliest thing I owned into the middle of them. But the ugly thing didn't wait to be introduced. It came up my driveway on a bright, cold morning in the middle of November in a black truck with Rourke Land Partners on the door, and Garrett Rourke got out with a lawyer and a man with a camera and a folder, and he came up onto my porch where Nora was setting out the rockers, and he gave her the bottom half of his smile. "Well," he said, looking her up and down, "I'd heard Del Mercer's boy had taken in help." He turned the smile on me. "Caleb, I'll make this quick, because I'm a busy man and you're a busy man, or you're pretending to be." The notes called, "You've got till the hearing before Christmas, and we both know you don't have $31,000. So here's a kindness you don't deserve. I'll still give you $60 for the corner if you sign today and save us both the courtroom." He set the folder on the rocker. "It's a generous number for a man about to have it taken for nothing." I said no. I said it the way my father would have, and Rourke shrugged like he'd expected nothing better, and he was turning to go, and it was the smallness of what he did next that told me exactly what kind of man he was, because as he passed Nora, he stopped and looked at her again, longer, and I watched him place her, watched a slow, cold recognition come up behind his eyes. "I know you," he said. "Vance? You're the bookkeeper from Hallbrook Title." He laughed, one note, delighted. "The one who cried fraud and got walked out for stealing?" He turned to me, loud, so the man with the camera could catch it. "You want to be careful, Caleb, taking in strays off the highway. This one robbed the last folks who trusted her. It's public record. Check it before you leave her alone with that till." And Nora stood there with her hands full of my father's rocking chair and went white. And she didn't say one word, and Rourke got in his truck well pleased and drove back down my hill. I have been ashamed all my life of the times I've said nothing, and I made up my mind. On that porch, I wasn't going to add this one to the pile. I took the folder off the rocker, and I walked it to the edge of the porch, and I dropped it in the mud, and I said, loud enough to carry down the hill after his truck, "The only thief I've ever met on this corner is the one who bought a dying man's debt so he wouldn't have to look him in the eye." Then I turned around, and Nora had set the rocker down and had her back half turned, wiping at her face fast and angry, like she was mad at the tears for showing up, and she said thin, "I'll go, Caleb. You've got enough trouble without carrying mine into it. He's right that it's public record. I'll just make everything you're already up against worse." And I said the truest thing I think I've ever said to anybody. I said, "Nora, that man out there wants to take the one thing my family ever built, and he just tried to take your good name to do it in front of a camera. And the two of us are standing here as if we're the ones who ought to be sorry. I don't believe him. I never believed him. I believe you. Stay." She looked at me a long moment, and then she came across the porch and put her forehead against my shoulder. Just for a second, just long enough for me to feel how tired a person can be under all that standing straight. And then she stepped back and wiped her face one more time and said, "All right. Then let me see the note. All of it. If he thinks he's taking this corner in a courtroom, then a courtroom is exactly where I want to be, because a courtroom runs on paper, Caleb, and paper is the one thing in this world I have never once lost a fight to. I brought her every document I had: the old loan, the sale of the note, the foreclosure filing, the Charlotte Shell Company, all of it spread out on the counter under the good light. And Nora went into it the way she'd gone into my ledger, only slower and more careful. And by midnight she'd gone very quiet and very still. And I knew that stillness by then. It was the stillness of somebody who's found the thing. "Caleb," she said, "look, the note sale. The document that transferred your father's loan to Rourke's Shell Company. Look at the notary block." And she put her finger on a little inked stamp at the bottom of the page, and she looked up at me, and there was something burning in her face that hadn't been there in all the weeks I'd known her. "I know this stamp," she said. "I know this exact stamp, because I filed 100 real ones, and I'd know a real one from across a room. And this one is not real. This is the drawer stamp. This is the same forged notary they used at Hallbrook Title on the deals I wouldn't sign. The reason my old firm handled Rourke's paperwork is because they were doing this for him, this exact thing, and when I wouldn't put my name to it, they got rid of me. Caleb, the transfer of your note is fraudulent. He doesn't legally hold your debt. He forged his way into the right to foreclose on you. The same way he's been forging his way onto little corners all over this county. And I can prove it because I'm the only person left standing who was ever in the room and can testify to what that drawer stamp is. I didn't fully understand all of it that night, but I understood enough to feel the ground come back under me for the first time since the letter. And I understood that the woman who'd rolled into my lot on a dead engine with $11 was the one human being in the state of North Carolina who could look at Garrett Rourke's paper and see the crime in it, and that of all the dark doors on all the roads she could have broken down in front of, she'd broken down in front of mine. We didn't do it alone, and I want to give the others their due. There was old Earl Whitfield, my father's oldest friend, who'd notarized real documents in that county for 50 years and knew every legitimate stamp in it by its serial. There was Ruth Combs, down at the County Register of Deeds, who'd known me since I was in diapers and who pulled every one of Rourke's filings for the last 4 years when Nora asked her to, and found the same phantom notary on 11 of them, 11 small parcels taken off 11 families who'd never known to look. There was a young legal aid lawyer named Dana Ortiz who took one look at what Nora had assembled and said she'd never had a case handed to her so clean. And there was Pastor Dwyer, who let us use the church basement to lay it all out on folding tables under the good light, and who told me, quiet, the night before the hearing, that my father would have been proud, not of the fight, but of who I'd chosen to stand in it with. The night before we went to the courthouse, Nora and I sat on the porch one more time under my father's light, and she said, "Are you scared?" And I said, "Only of losing it." And she said, "The store." And I looked at her a while and said, "No, not just the store." And she didn't say anything back, but she reached over in the dark and took my hand off the arm of the rocker and held it. And we sat like that a long time, and neither of us let go. The hearing was 3 days before Christmas in the old county courthouse in town, and Garrett Rourke came in like a man collecting a debt the world already owed him, with 2 lawyers in that folder. And he had a look on his face when he saw Nora sitting at our table beside little Dana Ortiz that I will keep in my pocket for the rest of my days. His lawyer stood up smooth and laid it all out. Valid note, valid transfer, borrower in default. Request in the court confirm the foreclosure and clear the way for sale. It sounded airtight. It sounded like the end. And then Dana Ortiz stood up and said, "Your Honor, before the court confirms anything, we'd ask you to examine the notarization on the transfer itself, because we have reason and witness to believe the transfer that gives Mr. Rourke any standing here at all was fraudulently executed." And she called Nora Vance. Nora took the stand in a plain blue dress, and she was not the woman who'd stood white and silent on my porch. She was steady, and she was exact, and she was devastating. She testified to 6 years at Hallbrook Title. She testified to the drawer stamp, what it was, where it was kept, how it differed from a lawful seal down to the register number that didn't exist. She testified that she'd been asked to file forged documents and had refused, and that she'd been terminated 3 days later, and she named the account she was falsely accused of stealing from and produced the reconciliation showing it had never been short a dime. And then Dana put the transfer of my father's note up on the screen beside a document Nora had lawfully notarized years before, and even from the back of that room you could see it plain as 2 different men's handwriting, the real seal and the fake one. And Ruth Combs testified next that the same fake seal sat on 11 other filings that had moved 11 other little pieces of this county into Garrett Rourke's hands. Earl Whitfield testified that in 50 years, he'd never registered the number that phantom stamp claimed. It took the whole morning, and it was not loud. And it was the most complete public undoing of a man I've ever watched. Rourke's lawyers asked for a recess and didn't get one worth having. And when it was done, the judge, a lean gray woman named Judge Boone, who'd said almost nothing the whole morning, took off her glasses and looked down at Garrett Rourke a long moment. And she said that the transfer of the Mercer note was void on its face, procured by a forged notarization, and that a party who comes into her court holding a fraudulent instrument holds nothing at all. The foreclosure was dismissed. And then she said she was referring the entire matter, all 11 parcels, to the district attorney's office, and that she'd be very surprised if Mr. Rourke's Christmas went the way he'd planned it. Rourke stood up to say something, and his own lawyer put a hand on his arm to stop him. And he buttoned his coat, and he walked out of that courtroom through a gallery full of people whose corners he'd tried to take, and not one of them said a word to him, and the silence they gave him was worse than anything they could have said. Outside on the courthouse steps in the cold sun, I found I couldn't quite talk. Ruth was crying and laughing at once, and Earl was pumping Dana Ortiz's hand, and Nora came and stood in front of me, and she said, "Well, Caleb Mercer, you get to keep your porch light." And I looked at her. This woman who'd come to me with $11 and given me back everything my family ever built. And I stopped being a man who says nothing. I said, "Nora, I didn't fall in love with my bookkeeper. I want to be plain about that, because you've had enough men be unplain with you. I fell in love with the person who wouldn't sign the lie 2 months ago in Charlotte before I ever laid eyes on her, and I've just been lucky enough to get to meet her since. I don't have much. You've seen the ledger, you know exactly how much. But everything that's on that corner is yours already. And I'd like the rest of my life to be too, if you'll have a quiet man who keeps a light on." And Nora Vance, who had not cried when Rourke called her a thief in front of a camera, put both hands over her face and cried right there on the courthouse steps. And then she took my face in her cold hands and kissed me in front of God and Ruth Combs and the whole square. And she said, "You fool, I've been in love with you since you told me you didn't ask me for $11. We were married in Pastor Dwyer's church the second Saturday of the new year, in front of a congregation that included every one of the 11 families, and Earl gave the bride away because there was nobody else to do it and he'd earned the right. And that night, the marriage we'd both been too scarred to reach for became the thing we built the rest of it on. I'll tell you the sum of it and let you get on, because it's coming on dark, and I've got a light to check. Garrett Rourke never built his plaza on my corner or anybody else's. The district attorney saw to that, and last I heard he was answering for those 11 forged deeds in a courtroom, where it was his turn to sit at the wrong table. The families got their corners back, everyone. Nora took her real name back, too. The truth of what happened at Howlbrook Title came out with the rest of it, and there's a bookkeeper in 3 counties now who has more honest work offered to her than she can take, though she only keeps the one set of books that matters, which are ours. Mercer's Corner didn't just survive. It's the best it's been since my grandfather's day, with soup on the stove and the regulars' names on the wall and a nursery going in above the store. Because come spring, there's going to be one more Mercer to climb those stairs. And if it's a boy, we've already agreed his name is Dell, after my father. And if it's a girl, she'll carry Nora's mother's name. And either way, that child is going to grow up being told the story of the night the whole rest of their life rolled into the lot on a dead engine and $11. And every night, last thing, after the register's counted and the door is locked, and my wife is asleep upstairs, I step out onto the porch, and I check the light. It's still just a plain yellow bulb in a tin fixture, burning over a dark road that runs 11 miles in both directions. I used to keep it lit because my father told me to, and because turning it off felt like giving up on something I couldn't name. Now I know exactly what it was I couldn't name. Here's the whole of what a quiet man learned standing behind his father's counter. The kindness you do gets forgotten by everybody but the road. And the road forgets nothing. You don't leave a light on because you expect it to bring anything back. You leave it on because somewhere out there in the dark, right now, there's somebody worn down to their last $11, too proud to knock, driving past one closed door after another, and it costs you next to nothing to be the one door that's still lit. But nothing you left deep burning for a stranger is ever really lost. One of these nights, when you're sitting alone at the end of your rope with the last of everything run out, the light you kept on for other people is going to be the very thing that saves you, and it will come up your own dark road, wet and shivering, and holding a thin coat closed at the throat, and it will turn out to have been on its way to you the whole time. So keep your door lit. You truly never do know which night yours is the only light somebody can find. Ours was a Thursday in the rain, and I very nearly didn't come down the stairs.